guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope that you've been doing well. Today I'm going to be teaching you about MBTI. This has been a popular trend for a while, but recently the Myers-Briggs type indicator has become very popular in Korea, and I thought it'd be really interesting to cover it. So, firstly, what is it? The MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator, is an introspective self report. Questionnaire. Indicating differing psychological preferences in how people perceive the world and make decisions. And what is the history behind this indicator? In the 1920s, there existed someone called Carl G. Jung. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is a very famous Swiss psychiatrist, and he wrote many books on psychology. One of them is called Psychological Types, and this book, Psychological Types, brought the theory of the name itself. Now, during World War II, there were two American women. Firstly, Isabel Briggs Myers, and her mother, Catherine Cook Briggs. So you can see that their last names contribute to the name of the indicator. Well, they studied Jung's research and wanted to create a handbook for women, and they tried to turn his academical, theoretical work into a practical indicator that could be used in real life. Now, what do you mean by an indicator that can be used in real life? Well, these two American women, they wanted to believe that the knowledge of personality preferences would help women who are entering the industrial workforce due to World War II for the first time to identify intuition. They tend to trust information that's less dependent upon the senses. Instead, they like context, and they also like patterns, and thus intuition is what seeks a wider context or pattern. So the meaning for them is not in the data, but underlying theory and also underlying principles that are manifested in the data. So it's looking beyond the data and what that data represents. They also have great imagination, so they tend to imagine a lot of possibilities, which makes them really interested in the future. And a way to describe how they speak could be very figurative and poetic in a way. So, context, patterns, underlying theory, imagination, and figurative. Next on our types, this guy will introduce us to thinking and feeling. Thinking, represented by T. They tend to decide things from a more detached standpoint using logical reasoning. Now T versus F, it describes decision-making functions. So thinkers are usually more consistent with the rules. They also tend to have trouble interacting with people who are inconsistent or illogical because, well, they tend to give very direct feedback to others, and they enjoy finding flaws in an argument. And lastly, their personality can be described as reasonable and level-headed. Reasonable and level-headed. So that's for thinking. Next, for feeling. They come to decisions by associating or empathizing with the situation. And thus, they tend to rely a lot on their personal values. They like to look at a situation from the inside. They tend to be warm and empathetic. And they also value harmony and forgiveness in terms of what the goal is when solving a situation. Now, that was thinking and feeling. And lastly, our fourth character will introduce us to J for judging and P for perceiving. Judging versus perceiving. For judging, they like to have matters settled, and they also like detailed. Step by step in instructions. And lastly, they love making plans because they want to know what they're getting into. Next, for those with perceiving, they like to have their options open. For them, rules and deadlines are flexible and they aren't hard on them. Perceiving also likes to improvise, and thus they are spontaneous and enjoy surprises and new situations. Judging versus perceiving is questioning whether people have a preference for using thinking or feeling, which is judging, or sensing and intuition, which is perceiving. Okay, next we're going to talk about popularity. If you know your MBTI, maybe you might be included in the top 3 most popular MBTIs. Second most popular is ISTP with 9.8%. Third most popular is ESTJ with 9%. And number 1, ISTJ with 15.9%. Next, second rarest is ENFJ with 2.2%. Third rarest is INFJ with 2.3%. And the rarest MBTI of all is ENTJ with only 1.8%. I got the popularity from the official MBTI manual 4th edition, and the results were taken from a sample of over 16,000 individuals from 23 different countries. Next, we're going to look at how MBTI could predict personality. There was a study that found 2 disorders with significant correlation with an MBTI type. Firstly is INTP with schizotypal personality disorder. Next was ISTJ with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So those with either of those MBTIs were found to have a significant correlation with those 2 disorders. It doesn't mean that all those who have the MBTI would have the disorder, but the chances that you would is just higher than others. So remember, it's INTP and ISTJ. Okay, lastly, we're going to look at real life scenarios, which I think is the most interactive and fun part of our video today. Looking at T thinking versus F feeling. I'm going to ask you a question and we'll see. So, a friend comes up to you and says, "I failed my exam." Do you say either A, which exam? How much did you get or score? Or do you say B, you'll pass next time? Don't be too disappointed. Now think hard on what your instinct tells you you would answer. A means your T, B means your F. T's mainly make judgments based on results, so they would immediately ask a factual question. Now, it's only after they obtain information on the what, why, when, how. After they obtain it, that's when they think analytically about what kind of advice to give their friend. Meanwhile, F, feelings, they place importance on the process and they make emotional based decisions. So they would firstly empathize with their friend first. Next, for question number 2, if a friend calls you and says, "I got into a car accident," what is your very first response? Is it A, did you file your insurance? Or even, have you gone to the hospital? That was A. Or would you respond with B, are you hurt badly, or are you okay? If you replied back with A, then you are a thinker. If you reply back with B, you are a feeler. Now, thinkers, they try to solve the situation or problem with realistic solutions, which is why they ask those kind of questions, while feelers are more focused on empathizing and being concerned over their friend. Feelers prioritize their friend's feelings over the situation and trying to solve it. Last question for T versus F. A friend comes up to you and tells you, I bought an iPad because I felt depressed. Now, when your friend tells you that, what is your instinct? Do you say A? Why are you depressed? Did something happen? Or would you respond B? Which generation? How much was it? If you responded with A, you are a feeler. If you responded with B, you are a thinker. Now, feelers are more concerned over their friend saying that they are depressed than the fact that they purchased an expensive iPad. Meanwhile, thinkers, they ask for factual information about their purchase instead. And they're also wondering what the relation between buying an iPad and being depressed is. Okay, now, S versus N. What do you think of when you see the word or look at an apple? If you are S for sensing, you would think red fruit or sweet. If you are N for intuition, you would think Snow White, Apple the company, or perhaps something scientific that's related to apples like Isaac Newton. The difference is that S's tend to think of objective facts first, while N's, rather than objective facts, they think of related stories with more original and creative thinking. Number 2, what do you think of when somebody comes up to you and says, don't think about anything? For A, you would actually not think of anything. B, you would think, how can someone not think about anything? If you were A, then you would be sensing. Next, if you thought B, you would be intuition. S's are able to not think about anything and stare blankly ahead, while N's have overactive imaginations that make it hard to empty their mind. Now, last question. Number 3. What goes through your mind right before you board an airplane? Do you wonder, as an S, I wonder what the lunch menu would be? Or if you're an N, you would think, what happens if there imagination. Final product. Okay, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope that you were able to learn something interesting